Minister, I just want to make a number of points about this bill. Can I first of all say that it's regrettable that we are now spending dull time revisiting this issue, given the amount of time that was spent on the principal act that is being amended by this bill. It is a terrible waste of time that we find ourselves back here debating issues again that should really have formed part of the last bill, and I'm not entirely sure that I accept the notion that that couldn't have been done at that time. But there's another point that I want to make about this bill, and that is that it is not legible for ordinary people. Once again, and I make this point all the time in terms of particularly amending legislation, you have a body of work in this bill that cannot be read without reference to the act that we passed last year and cannot be read without reference to other acts. And instead of taking a section that is to be amended and restating it in this bill as being the proposed new law, which is what we should do and which would be legible for somebody coming to the bill on its own, we have an amendment to the principal act which makes it largely illegible for ordinary people. That is a more general point. Can I also make two other points in relation to the issues at heart in relation to housing? First, in relation to water, and I make this comment specifically in the context of my own area of Dún Laoghaire. South Dublin generally has a major problem with water capacity, sewerage capacity. It results in a number of issues with water quality in Dublin Bay, because when you have a heavy rainfall event, the runoff from roads and streets and footpaths goes into the same system that the sewerage from domestic dwellings goes into. That goes down to a pumping station in the West Pier and is pumped in an under seafloor pipe into the Poolbeg station where it's treated. The problem is that if you have a huge volume of water going in after a lot of rain, the pumping station is rapidly inundated and cannot cope with the capacity. It has an 80,000 litre attenuation tank there which takes the overflow, but it very often happens that the overflow from the overflow tank ends up in Dublin Bay, where people swim, where people fish, which is used for recreational purposes. It is unacceptable in the 21st century that we can't stop that from happening. And it's something we need to address as a matter of urgency. And there's a number of solutions which I've set out in this House before to deal with not just reforming that system, but the separation of water and the reuse of water in a domestic context. Can I also make reference to the proposal that went before Cabinet today, as I believe it, to reduce the minimum size for small dwellings? I do not accept that that is the solution to our housing problem. I do not accept that making small apartments smaller somehow makes it easier to deliver housing in this country. What you're actually doing is making the living conditions of people in small dwellings, and I lived in one myself for many years, is not the answer. Now, what I understand from speaking to people in my constituency, including people involved in the building trade, the problem is getting finance, that the pillar banks and the financiers of developments are not giving them the finance they need, or not doing it in a way that allows them to get projects off the ground. Now, if that's the problem, if finance is the problem, let's set up a state vehicle to help them to do that. The answer is not simply to make changes in the minimum standards to make building more profitable. That cannot be the right answer. Let's solve the finance problem instead of making small apartments smaller, because that's really what we're proposing to do. And then finally, can I make reference to two amendments that I put down to this bill that have been ruled out of order, I'm sorry to say. I think they are relevant, because one of them refers to an amendment to section 38 of the Road Traffic Act 1994. That is a provision which allows local authorities to implement road safety measures. Now, nobody's opposed to that, obviously. The difficulty I have is that it is done without recourse to the elected officials at local level. It's something that is done, there's a series of measures in the section. It is a reserved function for the councillors to decide certain things in terms of putting the matter out to public consultation and things like that. But the final decision to actually implement the road changes or not is done by officials. And I am blue in the face in this House and in the Shannon, where I was for the last 5 years, saying that the officials are never going to knock on any constituent's door and actually ask them what they think. That's what councillors do. The hardest working members of our democracy have little power and less power because of measures exactly like this bill that take it away from them and give them to faceless, unaccountable bureaucrats at local level. That is a regressive and regrettable move, and we see it happening again in the rejection of the amendment that I put down to this bill. The other amendment that I put down relates again to local authorities and the provision of municipal districts in the 4 Dublin local authorities, Galway City Council and Cork City Council. Because there were not town councils in those local authorities, when the Local Government Reform Act 2014 came into effect, they didn't get municipal districts, with the result that all decisions have to be made at council level and cannot be made at what are called area committees in those local authorities. It increases the bureaucracy at local level. It increases the work that has to be done in the one council meeting per month. It reduces the efficiency of decisions being made at local level by councillors elected by their local communities. And again, we need to move to empower those people and to reflect the fact that we should be devolving those decisions to a different committee. We talk at European level all the time about subsidiarity and making decisions more and more localised, and yet we ignore that principle in the context of Irish law, taking powers away from the local level and centralising them into local government. There was an opportunity in those amendments to change that. Unfortunately, that's been rejected.
Thanks, Deputy Ward.